Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Olympic Cards and Comics Virtual Free Comic Book Day, where we have been interviewing comic creators, writers and artists, and musicians, and all sorts of fun people, so we can continue our celebration of what is normally our favorite day of the year. Joining me right now is Jen Van Meter. Jen is, aside from being an excellent person, and in fact one of my favorite people, is a fantastic writer. She has written for Marvel and DC, including a Black Cat, Amazing Spider-Man spin-off miniseries, a terrific Justice Society miniseries called Honor Among Thieves, and is the creator of what is probably my favorite indie book of all time, Hopeless Savages. Jen, thank you for joining us here today. How are you?
I'm doing great, and it's very sweet of you to say all those nice things.
Well, you know, I'm going to get this one right out of the way because, we have a series of prepared questions that we're going to ask you, some from fans and some from me. So the first topic is the character of Zero in Hopeless Savages. She's the greatest. That's not a question. That's just a statement. We'll get back to Hopeless Savages. One of the things we're focusing a lot is kind of like your gateway into comics, right? You've written for Oni and Marvel and DC and Dark Horse. Have you done any Dark Horse work?
Yes.
Yeah.
My very first work was Dark Horse work.
Yes. Oh, right. Blair Witch?
Buffy.
Where was Blair Witch in that?
That was Oni, and that was my first Oni project. I can run it through if you want.
Well, yeah, sure. Why don't you introduce yourself? Okay. I've talked you up, but you contribute, sure.
Well, so I was in graduate school at the University of Oregon, thinking what I wanted was an academic career, teaching media studies and English, and just starting to suspect that maybe I did not have the temperament for an academic career. And Greg, who I'm married to, was doing Whiteout with Oni. And we had come up to an event in Portland that we were invited to because he was doing this thing with Oni. So we're at this event, and it was like every other comics event. Like you're standing around and talking to people and enjoying their company, if you enjoy talking to people in bars and things. And you don't always know who you're talking to. You're just talking to a person, right?
Right.
So I'm talking to this guy about my academic work because he asked. And I start going on this whole rant about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was then on TV, and how it really modeled a different set of relationships between teen girls. And I was fascinated by it because I kept thinking, like, God, I wish that had been on TV for me. And the place that I found it was in comics. And, like, what kind of comics? And I'm like, oh, Love and Rockets, la, 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 la. And, we're talking back and forth. But I'm on this whole thing about Buffy and what I think characterizes the show. And then like, oh, nice talking to you. And I go off and I'm doing a thing and talking to other people. And like an hour later, same guy comes back to me and says, so Joe Nosmek says you're a writer. And I'm wondering, would you have any interest in writing a Buffy comic? And I'm sort of blinking, like, where did that come from? I'm an academic writer. And he says, well, I'm editing the Buffy books when they start up for Dark Horse. And I would really like to start that off with somebody who's not like, hi, I professionally write tie-ins. I'd like to start that off with somebody who really deeply loves Buffy. And would you want a shot at it? And I was like, well, yeah. So I was talking to Jamie Rich. Oh. But I didn't know. He was just this guy, right? And so that led to me pitching And my first thing wound up being 6 or 8 pages in the Dark Horse Annual Presents that summer. The exciting thing for me professionally was that it was the first Buffy thing, and it was in a book with a Mike Mignola cover.
Jealous.
So the very first thing I did sold really well, even though it had very little to do with me. Right?
Okay.
But at that moment, like, decent numbers attached to your name got you a second shot. So I got to do a short story for Flinch for Axel Alonso when he was still at Vertigo, and that had a Jim Lee cover. And he got Frank Whiteley to draw it. And it's like I had this amazing luck of like what I was in while I was learning. And I think, you know, like, it was a moment when like people were trying anthologies again.
Yeah.
So I was getting these lovely little 6 and 8 page opportunities to work with terrific editors who had time to walk me through it. And so then I pitched, I don't even remember the order of events now, but I pitched a Batman Elseworld story to Denny O'Neil, thinking this is me writing a practice pitch, and what he's going to tell me is what makes the pitch better.
Mm-hmm.
And they took it. And that was Golden Streets of Gotham.
Right.
And it was, again, I lucked out because Denny was retiring, and he took it on as sort of a pet project on his way out, was to walk me through a 64-page thing.
Nice.
And
that's not a bad teacher.
No. and you know, and to have him sit there patiently on the phone with me saying, well, it seems like you're spending a lot of real estate on these 2 pages doing these things. Tell me why. And I said, well, I've got to show this time passing. And he says, well, you know, there's all kinds of things we can do, like go outside, come back in, you know, like stuff that's like, it was obvious to me as a reader what was happening when I saw someone else doing it. It hadn't occurred to me that I was allowed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And just saying, oh yeah, you know, like, look at how this person does this. And it was lovely. And he's such a good teacher. And so that got done, and then was being drawn, I think, by the time we moved to Portland. And I had sort of decided, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to put my whole heart into. And that was when Jamie had moved to Oni, and he was their editor-in-chief. And he called me up when they got the Blair Witch thing and said, you used to do folklore, didn't you? I've got this weird thing. They want something that feels like artifactual, like the movie does. They don't want a comic version of the movie. They want something that feels like a found object. And we're on a tight timeline, so we need to do something that we could have 3 artists working simultaneously. And I figured out a proposal that basically could be like, so we found, like, Jamie had a thing that somebody handed him at a convention, and we have adapted the weirdness of it into a comic because we are money grubbers who want the tie-in money. Basically. Like, I just put it out front like Mad Magazine would.
Sure.
Said, we are doing this in a shameless appeal to you, but we also think it's a cool tie-in to this other story that these crazy students found in the woods, you know?
Nice. That's clever.
Right. But my luck kept holding, though, because it was like Tommy Lee Edwards drew one of them, you know, like all these amazing artists. And so then it was on the heels of that they said, well, what would you pitch if you could do just anything else with us? And I was like, well, I have this idea about this family, and that was Hopeless Savages.
Excellent. Thank you for steering back to where I want to go. So give us the elevator pitch for Hopeless Savages for folks who may not be aware of it.
Okay, well,
and you should be aware of it, by the way, listeners.
It starts from two places. The elevator pitch is, what if Sid and Dancy didn't die tragically of overdoses in a bathroom in New York, but instead got to have a happy suburban life with 4 kids and all that entails? And what if their kids were amazing? And what if they weren't the most tragic couple, but in fact the parents of the happiest, best family?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the thing.
It is wonderful. It is a love letter to music. It's certainly a number of fantastic artists worked on that as well.
Right.
You're not clearly held there.
My magic trick seems to be amazing artists are willing to work with me.
I can't tell you how much I want to learn how to do that. But so the breakout character, to my mind, they're all wonderful characters, and it's a funny and smart and charming book. Is the daughter, Zero.
Mm-hmm.
And I just adore her.
I'm so glad you love her.
She's the best. She's funny, she's smart, she wants to start her own band. So for people who haven't read it, her parents, former punk rock stars, are a little trepidatious about it, I would say. Supportive, but trepidatious. But Zero is such a fully realized character, and we see her at various ages through the course of the story. And she's always kind, and she's always very much an individual, up to and including my favorite part about her is her invention of her own language. She comes up with all these great slang terms that nobody else uses, but you totally understand what they are. Something is really great. It's Swervel, right? That's one of the go-tos, if I recall.
Yeah.
So where did that come from? Did she pop in your head kind of fully formed, or was there a lot of like, oh, my daughter did this, my son did this, I know a kid who did this?
It is, gosh, it kind of comes from a couple different places.
Okay.
One of the things that sort of set the whole idea in motion for the family was that when I was in graduate school, a friend of mine and I had a lot of students in our classes down in Eugene, Oregon, who were very clearly named. They were like the youngest children of hippie parents.
A lot of Aragorns.
I had an Aragorn. I had a Cinnamon. I had a Moonbeam. I had an Orca. I had like a Thessaloniki, like erudite, oddball, like names that were clearly coming out of a place of a certain kind of iconoclasm and pushback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, so where, like, given the ages of our students, where are all the punk rock kids? Like, where are the kids with names like Spigot, Aglet, and Destructor? And, like, why have we not had a kid named Cobra Commander in our class yet? Like, or whatever. Like, where are the names that come from not like shiny, happy people, but instead a kind of like, this baby is in the void with me kind of names? And so we, like, one of our jokes was sitting around making up names for our punk rock babies. And so the names for the kids, Arsenal and Zero, whose first name is Skank. Right. And Rat, whose name is Rat Bastard.
Mm-hmm.
And Twitch. Like, all of those names kind of came out of that conversation. And so that's kind of how that family kind of got into my imagination in the first place.
Okay.
But in the course of prepping my first script, like as I was starting to actually write, like, and especially once I had written some notes, like this is having come up with, here's the story, and now we're looking for an artist, and I've written little character bios so that the artist can start drawing sketches.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw Christine Norrie's first drawings of Zero, I was like, okay, this kid's so much cooler than me. And I owe it to her.
Nice.
Right? To make sure she's awesome. But also, I wanted the book to be all ages. And so then I was looking for, like, how do I let her have a foul mouth and also let the book be all ages? And I was like, oh, she makes up her own swear words. They're not actually swear words, right? Mm-hmm. And it sort of evolved out of that. And then I was like, well, why would she do that? Does she have an issue? And I was like, no, she does that because everyone in her family cusses and has slang. And why wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. Like to her, that's just how it works.
Well, and if everyone in her family is cussing, right? It's an excellent rebellion, is cussing but not cussing.
Right.
Much like the other one of the children who rebelled from mom and dad by going and being an accountant for Starbucks. I mean, I think that's fantastic, right? That's terrific. It's wonderful work. And again, everyone, we carry it, order a copy. It's fantastic.
My guiding principle whenever I'm writing them is that they are always braver, nicer, and more imaginative than I would be in the same situation. Like, I put them into difficult situations, or I think about difficult situations I've been in, and then I say, what would people much cooler and braver and more confident than me do? And that's sort of how the stories go.
That's terrific. Let's see. What's next on the list here? So what was the first comic you remember, like, reading or buying with your own money? Like, what was sort of your gateway drug to comics, or did you come to it very late?
So my gateway drug to comics was the long history of Jen Van Meter's family. I'm going to try and encapsulate into 30 or 40 seconds. On my mother's side of the family, there was a Dust Bowl migration out of Arkansas to California that led to being land poor for a couple decades. In the 50s, after the war, when they had basically struggled along with the farms, and then suddenly all of these, my grandmother and her sisters had all married men during the war who came back and helped farm this land, and like water values and things like that changed in the Central Valley of California, which meant that they went from being scrabbly poor to doing okay in the 50s and mid 50s. At which point my great grandparents bought a cabin in the Sierras and a little house in Santa Cruz that their daughters and their husbands and grandchildren could use to get out of the valley heat in the summer. Like, you can go to the beach, you can go to the mountains, right? And they weren't big places or anything, but you could put an awful lot of kids in like bunk beds and have some time away from the valley. So that's what those houses were for. And I spent a lot of time in them when I was a little kid. And in each of these houses, there were dresser drawers full of all the comics that the kids older than me, like my uncles and cousins, had left behind. So it was a total mixed bag. Right? There was like Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, and there was Millie the model, and there was like horror comics, and there was just this huge range. And if you are stuck on a rainy day in the cabin, you'll read it all if you're a kid who likes to read, and I did. And so at the age when, if anybody wanted to give me a cheap present, they gave me Little Lulu, which I loved. I could also squirrel off and read like creepy stuff with Frank Frazetta covers and stuff. And my memory of the first comic I paid money for was an issue of Jonah Hex.
Excellent.
That I was fascinated by because of its creepy ass cover. And I never opened it. To this day, I cannot tell you what is inside that book.
Do you remember which issue it was by any chance? I'm curious
I
now.
want to say, I know I looked it up once. It's not in the front of my brain.
Oh.
I believe it is like a number. It's got a 7 in it, like a 17 or a 27. It is a close-up of his face, and the meticulous detail on that weird little piece of flesh that locks his lips together, right? There's like this, it's not a proper scar. It's not a thing you've ever seen on a face, right? And I brought it home and I just stared at it and I was like, I will read this later. And I put it in the stack. And then I would get it out and be like, I will read this later. And I, to this day, like I would actually love to find, like, if it's been digitized someplace and find out what's inside that book. I don't know.
All right. I'll do a little archaeology in our back issues for you.
You would be the man to ask.
Yeah.
But it would have been new in about 75. But yeah, so, and I loved horror comics, and I've written about this a couple times in different places, but one of the things for me as a kid was that there were fantastic horror comics out there being drawn by like Toth and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was a scaredy cat kid. I did not like scary movies. I did not like scary TV. I did not like people try, now I'm going to tell you a spooky story with a flashlight. I hated all of it. I hated the you can't stop it. Like once it has begun,
mm-hmm.
the material is in charge of the time that you take to process it. But when I met scary comics where I could decide whether to open the book or turn the page, I was like, oh, I like scary stuff. I love scary stuff as long as it's comics. Right? And I also think that like some of the horror comics taught me a lot about how suspense works.
Oh yeah.
Because the picture close up on like the closed basket in the creepy lady's hand is scarier than now we're gonna cat scare you with something jumping out. I feel like horror comics for me as a kid showed me the mechanisms of how comics work, right? Because I think in particular with horror comics, it is very evident to you as a reader that you're doing the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That a good writer and a good artist are teaming up to make you do the work. And comics all work that way.
Right.
But a romance comic or a superhero comic can kind of trick you into not noticing. But I think with horror comics, it's like, it didn't take me long to figure out that what I loved was being called upon to do the work. But it also would betray me because I would sometimes put down a good comic and have terrible dreams for a week that I gave myself. Like I did that.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So are you an active reader of current comics, or are you mostly older stuff, or and if so, in either case, older comics or newer, what's the title that or creator you think is most under the radar that more people should be reading?
I love Faith Erin Hicks. I think she's amazing, and I've had the good fortune. Like I was reading Demonology 101 when she was doing it online.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had the good fortune to be able to watch her figure out the comic maker she wants to be, kind of in real time.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's fantastic. Um, and I felt like I'd met a fellow traveler when I started reading her stuff, because I feel like she is interested in some of the same things I am.
Mm-hmm.
I have got but have not read, and all of a sudden, the problem with this question is that, and actually, so one of the reasons that I discovered that I did not have it in me to be an English professor was that I felt undermined in my authority anytime I could not leap out with the quote or the name that I needed.
Understood.
To explain myself. Like, I've read a lot of books.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like a weak-ass English teacher if you have to stand there humming and hawing and mumbling for a while to come up with the name of, say, Melville.
Right.
You know?
Sure,
you
fair
know,
enough.
That guy
Fair.
who wrote Moby Dick, that guy. Right? You don't feel authoritative in that moment. And so if you don't have that kind of, if you don't have that kind of quick retention, it's bad for your confidence. I am having that moment now because I have in another room of my house the next book, the most recent book by the gentleman who did American Born Chinese.
Okay, whose name is escaping me at the moment as well.
I believe his first name is Gene. And American Born Chinese is an amazing, amazing book, and I cannot wait to read the new one. But I haven't yet. I'm very excited about it. Other things that I am recommending or reading or paying attention to. I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks in the last year because simply the nature of what else I'm doing with my life is that it's very nice to have somebody read me a story while I do stuff with my hands.
Fair enough.
And that's been really gratifying, because for a long time I thought that I would never, ever, ever like an audiobook. And it turns out that I can be put off by a terrible reader, but a good reader I can be very content to spend some time with.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught a class a couple years ago at the U of O, and then the following fall, pretty much the same class at PSU, Portland State University. And one of the things that I realized about talking to people who are now in their late teens and mid 20s, like that zone, I was woefully uninformed about manga. Like it had not been an area that I had read in extensively. Not for like out of disdain or anything. I just hadn't. But I sort of became aware while I was doing that I needed to learn more about at least sort of what we might call the great books course of manga.
Sure.
So I actually came to your store and bought like the first volume of 20th Century Boys and the first volume of Fruits Basket and the first volume of Sailor Moon, and like the volume ones of like 25 things. And I liked so many of them, and then went, oh, I can't afford to like any of these. There's like 30 of everything.
Yeah, they go on forever.
But I think one of the things that was great for me about that was kind of relearning comics and relearning the language of comics, and like the cultural differences, and like, oh, that means flop sweat and things like that. Like having to revisualize and recontextualize how things worked was really fascinating to me, because I think in the same way that learning a second language makes you understand some things about your own, it sort of refreshed comics for me.
Oh, cool.
To dive into manga for a while like that. And also to find out how many of my students had been shamelessly copying things that they loved and thinking I wouldn't notice, and I didn't. You know? Like,
Well, then they're cut out to be freelancers. We both. so, so if you were to, I'm not going to ask you this question. The question was, what was the piece of work that challenged you the most as a creator? I'm not going to hit you with that one unless you absolutely want to answer it, because I know your approach to your work is to labor mightily on all of it. So I think that's like asking you to pick your favorite child, and that doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, I will tell you a funny thing though.
Sure.
I had written 3 volumes of Hopeless Savages. I'd done some other stuff, and Steve Wacker, who was then at DC, called me up and asked me would I do a 4-issue miniseries for him with what became Honor Among Thieves, or a 3-issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to love this about the superhero editors, like when I was somebody's like Rolodex person for this. I loved when people would call up and they would say, so I have a problem that's like a problem with canon or a problem with the schedule. I need a thing done.
Mm-hmm.
Can you pitch me a story that would solve my problem? And what he basically said was, we've got a writer who's going to be doing a thing with the Injustice League down the line. Every place they've appeared recently, this has been their configuration. We want a different configuration. And what I'd like is a 3-issue miniseries that explains why that configuration is gone and this new one is here.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do? And I was like, and this is the thing, is I said, I don't know. I've never written a team book. I'm a little intimidated by that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, have you read Hopeless Savages?
Yeah, he got you there, didn't he?
And I was like, oh, because I had been tricked by the costumes.
Mm-hmm.
And like the genre conventions into thinking that that was an intimidating thing, when in fact I had been writing heartwarming family adventure, which is kind of what a team book often is.
Mm-hmm.
And once I knew that, then I was like, oh, I know what this is. This is a heist film from the, like, that's all it is. Like, the villains aren't the villains. They're the heroes of their little story trying to pull off a heist. And he was like, go for it. And I wrote one of my favorite things that I've ever done with superheroes. But they all have their challenges. Every single one of them has a thing that I think, oh, I can never do this. I suck. I'm terrible. They should have never allowed me to touch their things. You know, but for the most part, it winds up being rewarding. I think the fear makes me take care, and the carefulness is probably one of my better traits as a writer. At least editors and artists tell me that my carefulness is one of my better traits. They do not tell me that speed is one of my better traits.
Speed's overrated.
That's what I say.
Putting the toys back in the box in pristine condition is, I think, much more important. But and you're very good at that. So
it matters to me. I always feel like I'm handling somebody else's family china. So
that's a great analogy. I was in my head, it's always the toy box, right?
Yeah.
Like, I always hated it when the neighbor kid I used to live next door to, and of course I was raised to share my toys, and he could break anything just by looking at it. So I'd always dread him coming over because I was going to lose something, and I've always had that same feeling when I've been working on a corporate-owned property.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I give it back to them either in the condition I got it or improved, and that's daunting because it's years of history behind it. So.
And the thing is yeah, the years of history mean that, you know, there's never a way. It is rare that you're going to handle a character where you couldn't piss someone off if they saw your version or what you did. But you try to be respectful. You try to be careful. I think that was probably the hardest thing about the Black Lightning book, is that I felt like there were so many ways to screw it up
Yes,
And
diplomatically put.
I'm comfortable with having been asked in the first place. But it was also the first time that either of the big two had asked me to do something with a dude in the lead, and I didn't want to pass that up.
Sure.
But that was tricky because I was sort of like, here of all places, I do not want to make a mess that anyone has to apologize or feel bad about having read.
Right.
So.
And when with Black Lightning, I mean, there's some history there that you're working. That's a pretty mighty headwind to be flying into. So I thought you handled it beautifully. And speaking of the big two and characters being asked to write, like, is there a big two character, or maybe not a big two, but corporate owned character that you really wish you could get your hands on? Like, what's the one you really want to write that you haven't had the opportunity to yet?
Well, I used to say Aquaman
Mm-hmm.
because until Kelly Sue did it, I had not seen much in the way of like my headcanon Aquaman.
Okay.
Right? And I always felt like there's a way to do this, you know. And the thing is her Aquaman isn't my Aquaman, but her Aquaman's a lot closer than almost anybody's. Like everybody's, like lots of people have done things I loved and then like turned left.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been my relationship with Aquaman forever, right? Is that I kind of love this around the corner version of the character that is hinted at but never quite seen in other people's versions. Other than that, you know, I got my one issue shot at Wolverine.
I did not realize you had written a Wolverine story. I missed that one.
Yeah, it was one of the last things I did for either of them. It was they had a series, was it Tales of Savage Wolverine or something like that?
Yeah,
that would be like single issues and one shots.
Yeah.
And they asked me to do one, and sorry. And I did a story called This One Guy that basically plops him in the Central Valley that I grew up in, kind of observing and attending to what's going on with the organization of the farm workers and the farm strikes, and the way the way in which he is positioned really well to see himself in people who are both wanted and unwanted and welcome and unwelcome.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really fun to write. And having done it once, I'm like, he's hard. And I'm really glad I got to do it once, and I'm really glad I don't have to do it again because he's fucking hard. But I got to write him scruffy too, which is my favorite version of him. So yeah, so I got to do that. I've gotten to write Batman. I have not done much with Wonder Woman, but that's okay because I also am really aware of how hard she is. And I did get to do a Liberty Bell thing for Marvel years ago that kind of scratched my Wonder Woman itch.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because I got to do sort of a Golden Age style thing.
That's fun.
Not Liberty Bell, I'm sorry, Miss America. I did do Liberty Bell too.
I was gonna say, didn't you do a Liberty Bell? Yeah,
but
I vaguely remember that. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny because a lot of my experience with those companies and those properties has been that when I get asked to do a thing, I go, oh God, no, that is so not for me. And then if I get the job anyway, or somebody says, give it a second thought, the minute that I really dig in, I go, oh yeah. oh yeah, right? And usually that's been an editor being like, read this one story, or just think about it a little longer, or whatever. And then I start to go, oh yeah. um but it's funny because I'm not a continuity freak at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt woefully unprepared for those jobs because I'm so not invested in anything other than, what's the character's name? Who is the character's family? What is the character's problem? Like, that's what I want to know. And I always feel really intimidated by the readership I know is out there who really want from their comics a sort of understanding of the depth of detail. And I get that love. I have that love in other things, but not in my superhero comics.
Fair enough.
Know what I mean?
Yep.
That's not what I go there for. So that's always been a fear factor for me. And I think that that's been one of the reasons that I've been very happy to have somebody say, here's an underused side character. What would you do with 3 issues or 4?
Mm-hmm.
And I go, oh gosh, this is fun because no one cares what happened to this guy, or nothing has happened, or so many different, this character has so many different canonical pasts that I can just pick one and run.
Mm-hmm.
I love those moments.
Excellent. All right, I have one last question. It's on the goofier end of the spectrum, but this is apparently what we're asking people. What's your favorite breakfast?
Eggs Benedict, but not before 10:30.
Fair enough.
I don't actually like breakfast because the thought of food when I first wake up makes me ill. But my favorite breakfast food is Eggs Benedict, but I have to have like 3 cups of coffee first. Or 5, as my hand clarified.
Excellent.
What's your favorite breakfast, Eric?
Some kind of like homemade bread, toast, extremely well done bacon, black coffee, maybe hash browns. I'm not a big protein first thing in the morning guy. I need my carbs and the
I feel like I get PI's breakfast. Yeah, give me the usual, Jimmy.
Yeah. Pouring a little whiskey in the coffee cup. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm the same way. I can't eat breakfast first thing in the morning. I get a very upset stomach if I eat much before 10:30, 11 o'clock, and my 2 coffees. Well, thank you so much for participating. We're running up against my next call, so I'm afraid I need to say goodbye. Thank you for coming.
No, it was very nice to hang out with you and tell you things you already knew about me.
The grander they don't know. So
yeah, I know. It's so funny to be looking at your familiar face while I say some of these things. I really appreciate you guys doing this.
Thank you.
Free Comic Book Day is one of the few times in the year that I actually look forward to a crowd.
Mm-hmm.
So it's being really rough to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, we were a little mopey about it, and then Gab was finally just put her foot down and said, "Nope, I'm having my holiday." So
yeah, she's a very no moping, get to work kind of girl, which I love about her. And also, I hope that, you're making a bunch of content that will cheer some people up when they're like, but comics is the thing I love.
So that's the idea.
Keep me posted if there's anything else I can do to help out.
Will do. Have a good day. Thanks for
You too.
playing. Talk to you later.